Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy. My name is Crispin. Welcome to part 2 of our history of Lithuania. In part 1, we looked at the Amber Road, the ancient Baltic tribes, covering a period through to the early Middle Ages. Today we'll be picking it up around 1000 AD and finishing off at the conversion of Lithuania to Christianity and the uniting of the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth in 1387 AD. It's a fascinating period to cover because this is where we get a sense on an international level of who the Lithuanians were, recognition of it as a centralized political entity, and of course what was the theme all the way through this was the holding to their pagan beliefs in the face of this extraordinary Northern Crusade. To contextualize this, back in 1071 AD, there was a humiliating defeat of Byzantium and Anatolia. That caused the loss to the Eastern Orthodox Church of most of modern-day Turkey, including the areas of Jerusalem and Antioch. And that meant that it was no longer safe for Christian pilgrims to reach the Middle East. Then in 1096, Pope Urban II gave a speech that ended up kicking off the First Crusade to go and liberate the Holy Land from the Islamic so-called infidels. Now, once they had reached Jerusalem and captured it, they created the Kingdom of Jerusalem. You had Bohemond creating the other famous Crusader Kingdom of Antioch. And they held that territory until Saladin took Jerusalem back, kicking off later on the Third Crusade. So there was this whole new wave of warrior monks who took the cross, these new knightly orders, most famously the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, and some minor orders emerged as well, who are a key theme in this story, most famously and notably the Teutonic Order, which was a Germanic order of knights, modelled themselves on the Knights Templar, which were very French in character. And beyond the Holy Land, the Pope and other Christian leaders started to see ways of extending Christendom beyond into other non-Christian lands, the Reconquista in Spain, and as we will discuss, the Northern Crusades against the Baltic tribes. Now, the word Lithuania is first recorded in the year 1009 AD in a convent written by a woman in an abbey recording the chronicles of that area. Now, this is a fascinating period in which, even though there was Lithuanians who were the dominant tribe in what is now modern-day Lithuania, at the time it was recognized as being one of many. Some of the other key ones that come up in this story are the Semagotians, the Curonians, the Prussians, and the Semigalians. There are some others as well. Now, the Teutonic Order, which had gained a lot of benefits and patronage from various nobles throughout Europe, particularly Germanic princes, was given a papal dispensation to launch a crusade to convert the Prussians, the Baltic Prussians, who were a pagan tribe with their own language similar to that of Lithuania and their own religion similar to that of Lithuania. And they then went on crusade and over the period of decades defeated the Prussians, incorporated their territory into a new Teutonic state effectively, built all kinds of castles up and down that region, including the famous Königsberg, which we've discussed in other episodes, which then became part of Germany, and then later with the origins of the German royal family being from Königsberg. Meanwhile, to the east of Baltic Lithuania, there was the Rus kingdoms, of Kiev, Moscow, and of Novgorod. Now, the Golden Horde, the Mongol armies, famously swept through, defeated Moscow, reducing it to a vassal state, defeated Kiev, reducing it to a vassal kingdom, and were a major power throughout this period that we're discussing. It was one of the key things that prevented the spread of Rus influence through the modern Baltic period, because they simply were subjugated and paying too much tribute to the Golden Horde. The Lithuanians themselves were spared the invasions of the Mongol armies because of the dense Baltic forest and the Mongol armies being highly dependent on mobile horse archers. It was totally unsuitable to this dense forested environment that would prove itself to protect the Lithuanian people again and again throughout history. So the Lithuanians maintained their tribal independence despite the waves of migration from the steppes, the invasions of the Mongol armies, either under Genghis Khan or Tamerlane. It was highly insular against the incursions of the Rus armies, and it wasn't until the late 12th century that the Teutonic Order made serious inroads, first through Prussia, but then later to invade Lithuania proper. And the way that happened was that there was another knightly order called the Livonian Sword Brothers, who occupied a territory in modern-day Riga, Latvia. They did not have the same level of patronage and honours and respect of the Teutonic Order. In fact, they were denigrated through much of Europe as being little more than bandits and thieves, and they were very much reliant on their own resources. Well, in their battles with the Lithuanian Samotians to extend their territory, that's when Lithuania started to inflict serious defeats on Latin Christendom, in particular with their early battles with the Livonian Order. And so between the years 1236 to 1279, there were 4 major battles, many minor battles and countless skirmishes between the Lithuanian tribes and the Livonian Order. Each major battle was a stunning defeat for the Livonian heavy knights, who were time and again outmatched by the highly mobile light Lithuanian cavalry, who could use distance and very accurate spears against the heavily armoured knights. The Battle of Saul was a major defeat, and then the Battle of Derb lost 150 sworn brothers. And you have to understand that at that period, knights were the minority. They often, had many levies of villagers and tribespeople and other alliances, but the actually fully armoured knights were quite scarce. So to lose 150 were effectively nobles in one battle, and also the Teutonic Knights were allied to the Livonians in this particular battle, was a major defeat, and meant that Lithuania could maintain its influence over the coastline, separating through the territory of Livonian knights from the Teutonic Order, so they couldn't actually meet up and be aligned. And then after the Battle of Azekul, where another 80-odd knights were killed, plus thousands of soldiers, the Livonian Order collapsed entirely and had to be folded into the broader Teutonic Order, which was still continuing to consolidate its place throughout the former subjugated peoples of Prussia. Now, throughout this period, it's important to understand how Lithuania emerged as a kingdom. Until that time, you had all these various Baltic tribes, various sharing language and dialect and, of course, religion, but they were very much, internecine warfare. Initially, the Livonians and the Teutonic Order managed to find allies among the tribes to fight one another. But because of the forced imposition of this new faith, Christianity, and the expanding territory of these Teutonic Knights, effectively as their own state. Yes, they were a military order, but they controlled territory, they built castles, they introduced their own laws. So you had waves of Baltic refugees moving into what was Lithuania proper, and then this sense of shared struggle created a Lithuanian kingdom. And so I'll discuss the major figures of this Lithuanian kingdom throughout this century, most notably Mindaugas, who became king of Lithuania, and in 1241 temporarily converted to Christianity, as it turned out, and that got a recognition from the papacy of the Kingdom of Lithuania. But of course, many of his own nobles were incredibly upset by this, weren't willing to convert themselves, and in order to maintain power, he backflipped and went back to his pagan ways. And then subsequently, the Gediminas dynasty, which became the first true Grand Dukes of Lithuania, extending Lithuanian territory into Ruthenian lands towards Novgorod, capturing Pskov, and also extending down towards Kiev. At the height of its power in the 14th century, Lithuania extended from the Baltic coast down to the Black Sea and was fighting the Golden Horde in Crimea. We'll get more to that in the next episode. But meanwhile, for 100 years, one of the longest wars in all of Europe, the Teutonic Order waged war on pagan Lithuania, with waves of crusaders coming year after year in each fighting season. So what you would have is, in the springtime and the summer, waves of European crusaders would come in and campaign against the Lithuanians, and then they would retreat during the winter months back before their castles, where they would be garrisoned by the Teutonic Order. Despite this enormous pressure, Latin Christendom to the west and Eastern Orthodox in the Kingdom of Novgorod to the east, Lithuania, uniquely in the world, preserved its pagan belief system and its own systems of governance, despite periods of intense turmoil. I mean, between the years of 1263 to 1269, there were 3 different Lithuanian kings. They were fighting amongst themselves, but the sense of order and national pride that they had created and the sense of infrastructure meant that despite these periods of tribal conflict, of succession crises, the state of Lithuania was preserved despite the enormous external pressures. And it's one of the most under-researched areas in world history, the fact that the most recent form of paganism is Lithuanian paganism, the one to survive the longest, well into the late Middle Ages. And then when the conversion did happen in 1386, it was for political reasons, to allow the then King of Lithuania to unite with the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth, which will be the feature of part 3 in our next episode. That gives hopefully a good overview of how Lithuania became a state, not because it had emerged internally, but because of the external pressures of crusading armies fighting with them year after year, the emergence of the special kinds of Lithuanian tactics that allowed them to hold their own against enormous opposition, and very powerful, fully armored, well-trained Latin knights. They became one of the respected kingdoms in all of Europe, well established by the time of their conversion in the late 14th century. There's a lot more to discuss. Obviously, we've skipped over many important details, but hopefully that gives you a nice introduction. If you have any comments on that, please leave it down below. Like and subscribe to this video so we can continue making more, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.